Hello everyone, it's Benny, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a very simple Java game. And I'm going to be using this game as an example to show you how classes work. Not how to create them just yet, that's a whole thing of its own, but the basics of what a class is. Not in depth just yet, but the basics of how a class is and hopefully how to use them. I'm also going to use it to show you what comments are and how to use those. And I'm going to use it to show you how you can... Well, the focus is really going to be classes, actually. I'm going to show you how to use classes to solve really complicated problems, like getting user input, or generating random numbers. You know, things that would not necessarily be easy to do at first. That you wouldn't think, oh geez, I know exactly how to make a random number using everything we've done so far. And yeah, I'm going to show you how you can use classes to make things like that really, really easy. So, with that, I think we should just go ahead and just get started. So first off, let's talk about how this game works. If you watch my Minecraft channel, you'll know that not long ago I uploaded a video which showed you how to make a very simple sort of number guessing game in Minecraft. And I'm thinking of sort of trying to do something very similar here in Java, because, you know, I don't want to introduce something extremely complicated just yet. I just want to introduce an example that's simple enough to get the concept across without getting really bulky or complicated in the process. So, let's get started. Here's how the game works. You will get to pick any number you want between 0 and 15, and then the computer will generate a completely random number between 0 and 15. If the number you guess is the same as the number the computer generates, you win. Otherwise, you lose. So very simple. So now we have the task of trying to represent that in Java. And if you try to do this on your own, you'd probably be pretty overwhelmed right now. Like, seriously, I'm just going to give you a moment to try and think of how to do this on your own. Yeah, it's pretty complicated, isn't it? I mean, you don't really know how to do things. You're thinking, well, how am I ever going to do this? And you know, that's a problem that you have to overcome. And that's why we're going to talk about decomposing programs. So, we're going to decompose this problem of the game into something that's a lot simpler and easier for us to manage. And we're going to do this using something called the comment. And the comment is just some text you can put in your code that won't actually affect anything. So you can leave a message for yourself at any place you want in the code, and it won't actually screw anything up. And the way you do this is you just do 2 slashes. And anything written after this, I can put whatever I want after it, and it won't mess anything up. Java will know, oh hey, he's just making a comment, I don't need to worry about that. It doesn't have any effect on how your program runs, it's just a message for you. I'm going to use this to sort of break down this game. So, hopefully you understand the game well enough to at least describe how to play it. That's a pretty good way to start. So let's just start that. Let's write down how to play this, and then we'll sort of break it down. Break it into something simpler and simpler until we can eventually have something that's manageable. We're like, oh hey, we know how to do this. That's the way you sort of manage big complicated problems. And that's something known as top-down programming. So let's get started. How do we play this game? Well, first thing we need to get some number. The user needs to put in some number. So put in number between 0 and 15. Okay, I should actually say get number between 0 and 15, just because, why not? It makes more sense that way, because, yeah. So, now we have the user put in some number between 0 and 15. Now what? Well, after that, it makes sense that, well, we want some random number, so generate random number. After that, we have to determine if they're the same. So, test if numbers are the same. So, and that's pretty much everything that the game has to do. So, now we've broken down our game into 3 separate tasks. We need to figure out how to get some number between 0 and 15, we have to figure out how to generate a random number, and we have to figure out how to test if they're the same. Well, I don't know about you, but I think the third one seems kind of simple, kind of resembles something we've done so far, but the other 2 are kind of complicated. So, I'm going to actually put those in their own methods, because you know, that's a general good rule of thumb. If you've broken down something and something still seems pretty complicated, just put it in its own method. That's a fairly decent general rule of thumb. So, just get input, I'll create a method for that, And to generate random number, I'll just say get random number. So I've just made two methods, haven't really created them, but this is how I'm going to deal with them. And before I get away from these, I just want to say that, it makes sense that if I get input, that I want to sort of return about something. It'll make sense that if I get input, I want to return some integer. Because we're getting some number between 0 and 15, it makes sense we're going to want to have an actual number between 0 and 15 after it. So I'll just create an integer called n. I'll assign an equal to get input. And I'll make get input return an integer. And same story for get random number. So int val equals get random number, because it makes sense. If you're generating a random number, you'll want to have some random number out of it. You want to return some random number. So now I'm just going to sort of rough out the frame of the methods. I'll make them public, because we have to determine who can use it. And it doesn't really matter in this case, so I'm just going to put them as public, because, it doesn't matter. So public static, because we only want one of them. An integer, I'm going to call it get input. And, yeah, so here, that's my method, and for now, I'm just going to return 0. So, that's that done. And now, same thing for get random number. Int get random number, return 0. And we'll figure out how we're going to get input and get random numbers a little bit later. So now, we have the final thing we need to do. You need to test if the numbers are the same. So how do we test if the numbers are the same? Well, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot... Well, it sounds a lot like an if statement. So we'll just test if n is equal to val. Is equal to val. Remember, it's two equals when you're testing it. So now, we figure out how to test if they're the same. Now we just really need to sort of put in some messages so the user gets some feedback when they're playing the game, and we've finished the main method. So, if it's the same, I'm just going to print out we win. Otherwise, I'm going to print out we lose. And just because why not, at the end I'm going to print out what we put in. So, our number plus n, using string concatenation, and what the number that was randomly generated. So, computer's number plus val. And there, we've pretty much completed the main method. The only final sort of thing I want to do with the main method before we move on to do the get input and get random number is I just want to put a line at the very start that prompts the user to input some number. And I want this to actually just be print instead of println, because if you remember, the difference between print and println is println hits enter at the end and print doesn't. And I think it makes more sense if the user has sort of their cursor right here when they're inputting the number rather than it being on another line. And with that, I think the main method is completely done. We've created the main method of our whole game. Congratulations. So now the only things left are figuring out how we're going to get some input and how we're going to get a random number. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to do it using something called a class. And all we've really talked about classes so far is that everything pretty much needs to be in a class or it doesn't work. And we'll talk more about why that is when we get more in depth into classes. Right now I just want to talk about using classes. So, how do we use classes? Well, it's actually fairly simple to use a class, but it sort of involves understanding it. So a class, we're going to have to define it. The way I like to think of it is a class is like a type of data. So, for example, a point could be a class because it would have an x position and would have a y position. So, that makes sense. But the thing that makes classes special is that everything that's a class also has some functions go along with it. So let's say I have a car class. I have all the information required to represent what a car is, how it looks like, how it works, and yada yada. But, on top of that, a car also does some things, like you can drive a car. And that's, in a lot of senses, the really important parts of a class. So, that's sort of all I'm really going to go in depth into classes right now. The only other thing I'm going to say is that since a class is a type of data, you will have to sort of create something called an instance of a class to use it. Because, I mean, think about it. If I just have this idea of what a car is, that's a lot different from actually having a car. I mean, I can have this idea that I have a Ferrari, but, I mean, pretty different from actually having a Ferrari. So I'll have to actually create something called an instance of a class, and that'll give me something called an object. And again, I know it's a lot of fancy terminology here, but we'll get more into that when we actually start talking about creating classes and using classes, and how they can make programming a whole bunch easier. So, with that all out of the way, I'm going to talk to you about using classes to get input and get random numbers. So now let's talk about how we can use classes to make getting input a lot easier. Now, when you installed the eJava development kit, or just NetBeans if you chose to use NetBeans, it gave you a whole bunch of classes that Java already created for you, which provide functions for just about everything that, is at least commonly done. So, we're going to leverage that. We're going to leverage a class called the scanner class. So like I said, every class happens to represent some form of data which also has some functionality to it. So what sort of information does the scanner class represent? As it turns out, it doesn't represent all that much data. The scanner just represents... It's really... I shouldn't say it's really a type of data, because scanner class is more leaning towards the functionality than the type of data. And the functionality that the scanner class represents is the functionality of reading in information from somewhere on your computer, whether it be a file or just input on your keyboard, having some ideas of how we're going to do it now. So yeah, so we're going to use the scanner class. The way we do this is we type scanner, capital S, and you can call it anything you want. It's a type of data, so it can be used like some sort of variable. So I'm just going to call it scan. And now we have to initialize it to something. And you might wonder what you need to initialize it to, but when you're dealing with classes, what you want to do is you need to create an object. The way you do this, use the new keyword, and you just type new scanner. And then you put two braces like it's a method. So, now we actually have to pass something in like it's a method. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we go into what classes are and how they work, but yeah. So, in this case, we have to pass in what we want the scanner to take in, what it should be scanning, so to speak. So, in this case, we want it to be the input, whatever we're putting into the computer. So I'm just going to do system, because the input is part of the computer system, dot, because I'm going in, I want the in. And that's all the input in the computer, right there. So, now scanner knows about all the input in the computer, knows, okay, they want me to get information from whatever input's being put in the computer. I get it. And now we have a scanner for it. The only issue is we need to tell Java that we're using scanner. We need to import it, because Java, you need to import things. And I'm not sure if I actually talked about imports yet, but Java stores things like classes or other information that are part of Java in different places, and if you want to use them, you need to tell Java that you're using information from that place. It's kind of like trying to get to some file on your computer. You have to go for the folder system, you have to tell the computer where you want to look for the folder, or whatever you're looking for, before you find it. Or, you know what I'm talking about. I'm sort of failing today, but you understand what I mean. And there. So now we're importing the scanner. And I guess I can talk about imports more if they're all that confusing to you. But it's like saying, okay, hey Java, we're using information from this folder, which is actually some Java sort of package system, which is a little bit more complicated, but it's more or less the same thing for our purposes. Again, I don't really want to talk about imports that much in this video, but yeah. So now we have a scanner. Let's go back to getting input. How are we going to use the scanner to get input? Very simple. Well, first off, we're going to have to create a string. And I'm actually not sure if I talked about strings yet either. But strings are like this. They're just some sequence of characters and symbols, like this. This is a string, right here, what I have highlighted. And string's just the variable type for it. And technically speaking, string is a class as well, but we don't need to worry about that right now. But, so, we're going to have to make it a string, and call it just Joe, because why not? And this string is going to be what we get from the scanner, because the scanner returns a string. So we want whatever the next thing the user puts in. We do this by typing scan, which gets us whatever, it gets our scanner object. If we type dot, that gives me everything the scanner object can do. I just wanted to do scanner dot next, the next thing that we put in. And I should probably call this something more appropriate, but I'm actually going to call it temp, just because it's a little bit more official sounding than Joe. No offense to all the Joes of the world out there. So there, we have temporary variable. Now, obviously we want a number. We don't want a string. So we're going to have to convert this to an integer. So I'm just going to create an integer, call it res. We're going to have to set it equal to something. And we're going to have to leverage class again to convert our temporary string into an integer. So here's how we do that. Java actually has a class for our integers. It works just like the int variable we've been using all along, but it's a class. It's all the functionality that will be associated with an integer. And one of them, fortunately for us, is converting a string of characters that would represent some number into an integer. So, do integer dot is called parse int. It takes in some string, which in this case is temp. Now the final thing we have to do before we're done with input is we need to make sure this variable is greater than, we need to make sure it's in range. We need to make sure it's greater than 0 and less than 15. And we don't have to, but, it's better if we make sure. So, if res is less than 0, then just say res is equal to 0. And if res is greater than 15, I'm just going to say res is equal to 15. So, there. Now all we have to do is have to return res. And there we go. We've just gotten input in a fairly simple manner compared to what we'd have to do if we didn't have classes. So there, now that we're all done with that, we just need to create random numbers. Here's how we create random numbers. Now, conveniently for us, Java realizes that generating something randomly is a common operation. So I'm going to take advantage of the random class. And I'm going to call it rand, and we have to create an object of it to use it, so I'm just going to create a new random. And we don't actually have to put anything into this one. We do have to import it though, so I'll just hit Control-Shift-I to import. I don't know if I actually mentioned that earlier, but that's how you get the import. You just hit Control-Shift-I and NetBeans will do it for you. And there. So now I'll just create an integer called res. It'll be equal to rand.next int. And this takes in some variable. The variable it takes in is 1 greater than the maximum value you want it to generate. Now that sounds a little bit weird, like why would I want to put in a variable of 1 greater than the maximum value you want it to generate? But it's how it works. And 1 higher than 15 is 16, so I'll pass in 16. So now I just need to return that, and there. And that actually should be the entire game created. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to test it. So let's just run it. Let's hit the run button, see what happens. Input number. I'm going to put in 14. Now enter. It says we lose. Our number 14, computer number 15. So if I run it again, put in 13, we lose. Our number 13, computer's number 12. Put in 7, we lose. Our number 7, computer's number 4. And we can keep doing this all day. I'll put in 1. But the point is the game works. And if I happen to put in something that is higher, as you saw there, generate 15, put in something that's lower, puts it back to 0. Just going to put in 12, and hopefully I'll eventually win. So I can show you that winning actually does work. Yeah, this could in theory take a while, because it's not exactly likely that, oh hey, we win. So, yeah, that works. It determines if we win properly. Our whole program works. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you understand the basics of using classes. You probably won't understand classes all that much just yet, because I haven't gone over them that much. I'm trying to sort of avoid classes as much as I can, because they're a really big and complicated thing, and they'll pretty much change everything once we get into them. So yeah. So, thank you, and I'll see you next time, I think. And again, hopefully understand everything. So thank you, see you.